What's going on, friends? It is getting about that time of year while we're out riding and enjoying the fall weather that we really need to start thinking about what we're going to do with our motorcycles this winter. Now, unfortunately for some of us, we don't get to ride all year long. I know some of our friends up north, a lot of times, it's just basically impossible to ride in the winter. So depending on whether you live in an area where you absolutely can't ride this winter, or whether you get to get out periodically, and if you got to ride year round, I still got some tips for you there today. But guys, while you're out riding, start thinking about what you're doing with your motorcycle this winter while you're out enjoying that fall weather. Now with the fall riding season here, winter is approaching. And the worst thing you want to do is wait to the last minute to figure out what you're going to do with your motorcycle, because I guarantee you, you're going to forget something. It's just going to get put up without anything else done to it. And then you're going to come out next spring, try to get on your motorcycle, and you're going to realize, holy crap, I've got a bunch of stuff to do to this thing. It won't start. I've got all these issues. You're going to try to get it into a shop. Hopefully you're going to do it yourself. But if you got to get it into a shop, chances are they're already going to be backed up. Not only that, you might have trouble getting some parts. And basically, this is something that was totally preventable. Now, when it comes to fall riding weather, one thing that you really want to start being mindful of is your fuel. Now, obviously, we don't really want to put ethanol in our bikes, but it's getting really hard to find gas stations that have just straight pure gasoline. So this is something we really got to start thinking about now before we basically unintentionally park our bikes and they sit for a month. Guys, if you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Running ethanol fuel in your Harley-Davidson, it's not the best thing in the world, but it's not going to hurt it either. It's only going to hurt it if the bike sits with ethanol fuel in it. If you're riding it constantly and completely burning through all of that ethanol-laced gasoline, it's really not that big of an issue. But if the bike is going to sit for a little while, this is where we start to have problems, especially on a carbureted bike. Now, we all know that ethanol is very corrosive, and it also will basically attract water. So if the bike is sitting without any kind of fuel treatment in it, you risk collecting water in your fuel, and basically what happens when you get the water in the fuel, it starts to rust things, and our gas tanks are made of metal. And this is even worse if you have a carbureted bike, because of the float bowl in the carb. The fuel actually sits in that carburetor down in that float bowl. It gums up, it gets rusty, it gets crusty, and you can pretty much do the math from there on what you're going to have to do. Now, even worse if you have a fuel-injected bike, this stuff can ruin injectors, it can ruin your O-rings, it can ruin your fuel lines. There's a lot of bad things that can happen associated with ethanol if you leave it untreated for an extended period of time in the bike. Now, I do recommend when you're coming into the wintertime, you definitely want to start putting some Sta-Bil in it, and maybe on your last ride before that big cold snap, go put some Sta-Bil in it and try to find yourself some straight gasoline. Now, what I would really like to see happen is that we actually drain the fuel. Now, this is pretty easy and simple on a carbureted bike, but if it's a fuel-injected motorcycle, well, you're pretty much going to have to remove the fuel lines, take the fuel pump off, or siphon it out somehow to make sure you get it completely clean and dry. That's the best way to avoid it. That's what I really like to see, especially if you ride up north and the bike's going to actually sit all winter long. Now, if you live in an area where you're periodically going to ride the bike, just putting a good fuel stabilizer in there that counteracts the negative effects of ethanol, that is the way to go. Because there's no point in draining all the fuel. If you're going to come out and maybe get a couple of days each month during the winter that you can actually ride the bike, there's no point in draining all the fuel out from there. But if the bike is going to sit all winter long and you're not going to ride it, I would definitely recommend pulling the spark plugs out and putting some fogging oil down there. That is not something I would do if you're going to periodically ride the bike, only if it's going to be stored all winter long. Now, the other thing that we want to tackle if we're going to be putting our bikes away for the winter, or they're going to be sitting more, is definitely get a maintainer. Get a battery tender, some form of low amperage automatic shutoff battery maintaining system. What I really love is the ones with the pigtails that you can actually install them on their battery, discreetly run them out where they're easily accessible on your bike. You pull into your garage wherever you store your motorcycle, you've got it plugged into the wall, you just plug it into the bike and you forget about it. It'll actually maintain the charge on the battery at a low amperage to where basically it keeps the battery at 100% and you don't have to worry about that cycling that battery where it drains down, then you start the bike and charge it back up. That's not good on the battery. Now, I know there's some different opinions out there about leaving your bike on a battery maintainer Personally, I love to do it. I do it 100% of the time with my bikes, and I get about roughly 5 to 6 years out of a battery on my motorcycle. Not only that, by keeping your battery plugged in, you increase the battery's life. You know that battery's always ready to go when you go out to start your motorcycle. And as always, power sports batteries aren't necessarily as tough and as good and as long lasting as cars, but if they are properly maintained with a battery maintainer, that will actually extend the life of the battery. As I mentioned, I usually get 5 to 6 years. In fact, I got almost 7 years out of my last battery on my bike. Now, this is kind of a controversial one here, and there's a lot of different opinions on this, and I know Harley-Davidson recommends changing your oil once a year. Now, if you run a mineral oil or something that's less expensive, not that any motorcycle oil is cheap, but if you don't run a synthetic oil in your Harley and it's less expensive oil, I would go ahead and change that once a year. But for the guys that run the synthetic oils, and say your oil change interval is 5,000 miles on the bike, if you don't exactly ride 5,000 miles, it's kind of hard to justify changing that oil. Maybe you didn't get out, you didn't even put 3,000 miles on the bike this season, or even within the year. Can you go ahead and run a couple extra 1,000 miles the next year and maybe change it in the middle of summer yourself on a night that you're not doing anything? I personally believe that's okay. A lot of the theory behind changing the oil before you store the motorcycle or put it up for basically, well, I wouldn't say an extended period of time, but let's just say 30 days, for example, that is basically to get all of the contaminants from the products and byproducts of combustion that would be in the oil out of there, and you store it with fresh, clean oil. Well, I guess I kind of come from the school of thought of what's the difference of it sitting in the crankcase versus sitting in the bottle. And especially if you've got oil that's very low miles, say you only put 1,000 miles on it and that's all you did for the year. Do you still need to change that oil? Personally, I don't believe so, but oil does tend to collect moisture and everything, but with that moisture collected in there, you get the bike up to temperature, you ride it, it's going to cook all of that off, and that oil is going to basically run through the filter and you're going to be good to go again. Now, I say that, but that's only with synthetic oils, because synthetic oils are inherently a lot better than just the regular old mineral oils, hence the reason why you don't have to change them as often, and they lubricate and protect the engine better. So guys, just kind of to recap, when it comes to fuel, definitely want to put 100% gasoline in it with stabilizer if you can. If you're going to be able to ride the bike a little bit, or even if you have to store it all winter long with fuel in it, don't just put it in the tank. Actually put the fuel stabilizer in there and ride it. Put some good miles on it to make sure that it gets through the entire fuel system. That's very important. Now, when it comes to storing with ethanol, even with an additive that counteracts the negative effects of ethanol, I'm still not really a fan of that. I would rather just completely drain the fuel. You're going to let the bike sit all winter without being ridden whatsoever, drain the fuel, and fogging oil the cylinders. This will make your life a heck of a lot easier when it comes to actually starting the bike up in the spring, only if it's being stored the whole time. Now, if you're literally storing the bike all winter, I would probably go ahead and change the oil in it. It just depends on how many miles are on it, but like I say, all winter, I'd probably change it anyhow, even if it's synthetic. But guys, these are just some simple tips and little tricks that you can do. I mean, it's pretty much, I'd like to think, common knowledge these days, but I know a lot of viewers on our channel may be new. They don't have a lot of experience with motorcycles. This is just something that I like to throw out there, just kind of as a reminder to everybody. I mean, even myself, I like to hear it, because honestly, mechanics are probably some of the worst people about taking care of their own stuff. Trust me, I've worked with a lot of them over the years. But anyhow, guys, I definitely want your opinions on the thought of changing your oil, whether you've reached those miles or not, doing it 1 year, whether it needs it or not. Or do you feel like, hey, you know what, I've got 3,000 miles, I'll put 2,000 miles on in the spring and I'll change it on a night I'm not doing anything. What's your opinion on that? Do you go ahead and change the oil, or do you let it ride till you actually hit the actual mileage interval to where it says to change your oil? But anyhow, guys, that's all I've got for you this week. If you guys enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit that like button. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. But till next week, guys, you stay safe on the streets, ride smart, dodge those cars, and be thinking about what you're going to do with your bike this winter. Thanks for watching, guys.